Anybody seen one of these anytime recently? Maybe 1,000,000 times? How many times have you been told to wash your hands in the last 4 months? It's just to the point where it's just like, wow, are people still having to be told to do this? But maybe they do need to do that. These are, what do we call this? This is kind of think about this. We didn't even hardly use this term in the past, but now it's like probably one of the most well-known words, social distancing. We need to social distance, and I am not here to talk about the pros or cons of any of that. What I want us to think about is the impact upon our relationships with social distancing. We could even throw the word mask in there, and 6 feet apart, 2 meters, depending on which country you're in, and all the signs about holding your hands out, making sure you're that far apart. All the things that we've gone through with plexiglass, we can't really touch anyone. What's the impact on our human relationships? And I want you to begin to think about that. The main doctor from the U.S., Dr. Fauci, who of course is well known, actually said these words: "I don't think we should ever shake hands again with you, to be honest." And I'm thinking to myself, oh man, I can't imagine that. We get to the point where we just go, wow, we're so in that, it's so bad that we can't even physically connect with one another. Can you imagine a future where you go to shake someone's hand and they kind of pull back and go, ooh, I don't want to do that? Our world may never really be the same after that. That's what we're hearing. It may never be the same. But this morning, I want us to look at this from a really positive standpoint. What have you learned about relationships in the last 4 months? What's come to you? What lessons have you heard from God and you go to yourself, man, I don't want to forget that? Because that's the series we're in right now, this whole series on what have we learned and what do we not want to forget? Last week, we talked about our homes, both the house and the family in that house, about what we wanted it to become. We talked about it being a place of joy against the bad news of life, a place of Sabbath against exhaustion, a place of order against the rushed chaos of our world, a place of grace where we hear and we feel acceptance and forgiveness, a place of God's celebration, a place of God's worship. We want our homes to become that. It's not out of character for our homes to hear music or to hear people praying in a way that you go, wow, this has become, once again, those little logos that we put on our houses, churches. Well, today we want to really take that next step and ask the question, how do we interact with people? And I want you to begin to really think about Jesus and how he interacted with people. I'm going to really quickly, we're going to turn to the 8th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew. And we're going to go through this really quickly, a lot of little stories that are packed into this one chapter. And the reason I chose this is because this chapter has a lot of different people that Jesus is interacting with. And I think it's really helpful to see how Jesus valued people. And that's all we're going to try to get from these passages. How did Jesus value people? Chapter 8, verse 2 and 3. A man with leprosy came and knelt before him and said, Lord, if you are willing, it's a really interesting phrase. If you are willing, you can make me clean. Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man and said, I am willing. And he said, be clean. Immediately he was cured of his leprosy. I want you just to think with me for a moment. The leper is this outcast, the untouchable of society. First of all, you notice that as the guy's coming up, Jesus doesn't start hollering out what others would have been hollering out. Hey, whoa, you're unclean. Back off, dude. Get away from me. No, he's actually stepping towards him or stepping into the relationship. And the leper asked him something I think that really represents what the leper had probably experienced all his life. Are you willing? I imagine there's many times in this leper's life where other people could have done something for him, but they weren't willing. And all of a sudden you see Jesus going, are you willing? And Jesus responding with, yes, I am willing. Hold on to that one. Matthew chapter 8, verse 5. He meets another person. Jesus had entered Capernaum, and a centurion came to him asking for help. Lord, he said, my servant lies in a home paralyzed and in terrible suffering. And Jesus said to him, I will go and heal him. Think about who the centurion was. The centurion, they're enemies, right? Those are the bad guys. If this were, a movie, he has on black, right? He's the bad guy. Think about this. It's going to be this kind of person that actually puts Jesus to death. A centurion does that. And yet Jesus doesn't interact with this guy like he's the enemy. Jesus doesn't look at him through the group lens. Think this through with me really carefully. He doesn't look at the centurion as a centurion, lumping all the most horrible things that centurions had done. And they had done a lot of horrible things. All the horrible things that they had done, he didn't lump them all together and go, you're one of those guys that did all those horrible things. Jesus didn't do that with him. He didn't interact with him that way. Matthew chapter 8, verse 14. And Jesus came into Peter's house, and he saw Peter's mother-in-law lying in a bed with fever. He touched her hand, and the fever left her, and she got up and began to wait on him. This one now, Jesus moves into kind of the realm of family and deep friendship. It's interesting in this passage that Peter doesn't even ask for help. Peter doesn't come, at least we don't know that he does. We don't have a record of Peter going, hey, Jesus, could you come to my place because my mother-in-law's not doing well. There's just this intimacy between Jesus and Peter and ultimately his mother-in-law. And Jesus didn't want to, Peter didn't want to impose upon his friend. Maybe he was at that moment where, it's not that big a deal. It's not life-threatening. It's not a big situation. She's just not feeling well. Jesus is too busy for that. And yet, in the middle of all that, Jesus is not too busy at all. Matthew chapter 8, verse 25. 25 and 26. Jesus is getting in a boat, and they've gotten in a boat, and there's a big storm going on, and the boat's about to sink. You guys many of you know the story. And the disciples go to Jesus, and they say this, and the disciples went and woke him up, saying, Lord, save us, we're going to drown. And he replied, you have little faith. Why are you so afraid? He got up, rebuked the winds and the waves, and it was completely calm. Now we see Jesus with his most intimate friendships. And I want you to just ask yourself the question, how do you view Jesus and the disciples? Is Jesus and the disciples a group of close friends, or is that kind of Jesus' business acquaintances? He's just doing business with the disciples, just getting stuff done that needs to be done. There's another one of the Gospels that add a little phrase in this moment when they say, don't you care that we drowned? An interesting question. Did they understand who Jesus was? Do you care that we're drowning? The answer, of course, is, where's your faith? Do you think, with all you've met with me and know of me and how much I've already given to invested in you, that I would let you drown? Matthew chapter 28, verse 28. And they arrived to the other side of the region of the Gadarenes. 2 demon-possessed men came running from the tombs, met him. They were so violent that no one could pass that way. What do you want with us, Son of God? They shouted. Have you come to torture us before the appointed time? This one's really interesting because right here we definitely have Jesus' the kind of the most distant spiritual distance that you could have between Jesus and demoniacs, like people who've totally given over the different religion that they were in. They were Samaritans, a different religion, and they were different on the kind of the far end of the spectrum spiritually. And then there's this phrase again, have you come to torture us? And Jesus, while he doesn't say these words, he could have easily said, no, I've come to free you. Torture you? I've come to restore life to you. That's what I've come for. Well, It raises a lot of question about Jesus and how he valued people. How did he live that out? See, we talk about Jesus loved people, and I think if we're not careful, we think of that as just kind of an emotional response. Jesus had emotions towards people. Over the last few months, I hope that as we have gone through the last kind of isolation and lone times and people that we couldn't see that we wanted to see, I hope that you have begun to value people more. I remember the first moments I began to see some of you again for the first time, and just almost the joy of just seeing your face again, not with pixels. Real face. I mean, I even enjoy just seeing faces online. I can't imagine having gone through this where you didn't see people at all. But the ability to kind of read the glance of your eye, the ability to see the smile on your face, brought great joy to me. I want you to think about some of the areas maybe that you've been challenged on your relationships. And here's kind of some of the major areas that we should look at. First of all, our families. We talked a little bit about this last week, so we're not going to focus on that this week. But this kind of became our sole kind of major human connection for a while. How many of you just connected with your family for the most part for a while? That was me. I saw people online, but for the most part, it was just family members and just a very passing of other people, but no relationship with anyone but family. Yet I have heard people say, I really enjoyed those relationships growing, seeing how important they really are. Maybe we had taken them for granted a little bit and realized that these are the people that I'm going to live most of my life with. I'm going to invest most of my time and energy, and I don't want to lose that coming out of COVID and isolation. I still want to be able to make sure I invest in those relationships and make them as good as they possibly can be. The other kind of network that we had was our friendships. I can honestly say that I deeply missed my friends and acquaintances. And, sometimes there's kind of a blur between those, exactly who falls into which category. But, some friends are a little deeper than others. But man, did I miss my friends. It's one of the great things about where we are at least now. At least now we can be with friends a little bit, right? And that's pretty cool to be able to do. I want to read from Ecclesiastes, chapter 4. What the Bible says there about friendships. 2 are better than 1 because they have a good return for their labor. If one of them falls down, one can help the other up, but pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Man, did you ever feel that some of those moments during this COVID time that, man, these friendships are so important to me. And I don't want to lose that coming out. Matter of fact, I want to invest more time in friendships than in the past. How about this next category? How about your church family? Sometimes we can't be close with everyone who's a part of Journey. But man, did you miss just saying hello and connecting and seeing how people are doing? And maybe you've had this moment where you're just going, man, I wonder how so-and-so is. Because they're really not in that close social network, but you're really still very concerned about them. The reality is your worship encourages me to worship, and it's been great. And once again, some of the Zooms have been wonderful, but since we've started gathering here, just to be able to hear other people worshiping in song, the kids' Zooms when they pray, brings smiles to my face, and I'm assuming to your faces. To hear conversations going about what God's been doing. We had great ones this morning in the Zoom prayer about what God's already been teaching you, what God's calling you to pray. And even in this awkward kind of online experience, I want to encourage you to continue to build your church family. Hebrews chapter 10 kind of gives us a really poignant passage to grab a hold of about this kind of reality about our church family. It says this, let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, for he who promised is faithful. and let us consider how we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds. Let us not give up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but let us encourage one another. And all the more as you see the day approaching, this whole idea of getting together in any way possible, whether that's texting or FaceTime or Zoom or meeting together like this or getting together for small social events, to encourage one another in good works and good deeds. What's God doing in your life? That's what we need to be doing right now. But Jesus kind of stretches it to even further. And when we kind of look at where we begin to go, man, these relationships are so important. One of the things that the pandemic really showed us is how important one another really are, our community. Whether that's, we're talking about just this local community of Collingwood all the way to the bigger, the nation and even the world. We realized how tied we are to one another. And for those that have known me for a long time, you know that I've often talked about trying to add value, even to the store clerk. You go into there and you see them, how's your day going? Boy, when the pandemic broke out, I really tried to even do that even at a much higher level, because I realized that I'd grown accustomed to just kind of ignoring people. Just not noticing because I'm busy, I'm just getting my stuff, I want to get it bagged, I want to go home, get food ready, and all of a sudden the pandemic hit. All of a sudden you've gotten used to standing in line just to get groceries. And then you get there and you realize, particularly at the very beginning of the pandemic, there were no shields for the grocery store clerks. There were no masks for them. And I began to go, man, these people are really important to us. And I hope that you had that same sense of the value of people around you, the people who brought food into our community, the transportation people, medical workers, people in government who were trying to make good decisions, people at church who were trying to keep things rolling, businesses that were trying to keep working. Have we come to kind of the grips of how important we are to one another's existence? And one of the things that I think hit me the hardest is when all this first kind of took place, the number of teens and young adults that were manning those cash registers at Freshco or Walmart. And I know there was a variety of ages that were working in all of those places. We don't want to minimize any, but I really began to notice how many teenagers were keeping me alive by filling shelves with groceries and how important they were to us. We don't want to lose a sense of that. We don't want to get back to the point where we just kind of ignore who's behind the counter. And the last one that we want to look at, the people that we need to value. Once again, back to Matthew chapter 5. In Matthew chapter 5, Jesus says these words, "You have heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes the sun to rise on the evil and the good and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your people, what are you doing more than others? Don't even the pagans do that? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect." If there's any challenge I think we want to take from God's word and the time that we're living in now, is valuing people who are radically different from us. Jesus tells us to value our enemies because God does. The rain that we are experiencing today is not just for the farmers who love him or that love us. It's for all farmers. Every human being has value to Jesus. If I could just take you back to that Matthew chapter 8 chapter. Think about it. Jesus doesn't run into anybody. He goes, wait a minute, you don't matter to me. Get away from me. You don't matter to me. You're not important enough for me. You're against me. Well, then I'm against you. Those are the words you've never heard from Christ. See, he loved every human being. He gave value to every human being because they bore the very image of the Father. It's stamped on their hearts. Last week, we started with the golden rule on how to treat people. And it's a great place for us to remember to treat others as I want to be treated. We want to go a little bit deeper. In Mark chapter 12, here's what Jesus says there. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. The second is this. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than this. So how do we go about valuing others and not losing that? How do we really grab a hold of personal relationships, and how do we hang on to those? I think it really hinges on this phrase, love your neighbor as yourself. See, Jesus extends and expands the idea of neighbor when he talks. He's not just talking about what they thought of neighbors. Neighbors was the people that were close by and that they liked. And that they were willing to exclude other people who didn't kind of fit the religious system, that didn't hold to the law the way they did. But Jesus extends it to anyone that they came in contact with. That was the whole point of the Good Samaritan parable. Anyone that you kind of come in contact with, that becomes your neighbor. And then he also in this passage extends the depth of love when he talks about love them as you love yourself. See, Jesus sees the value in each person, family, friends, his disciples, enemies. And I want to just challenge you a few ways that you can actually love people through value. Here's what some of the things that Jesus did that we can do. First of all, he valued people through vision, meaning he saw them. The leper would have been really easy to not see. In the truest sense. I don't mean he wouldn't have seen him, but I mean to ignore. Think about the people that kind of get missed sometime in our world. Kids, elderly, store cashiers, people who drive by us really quickly and aren't nice. We tend to just kind of forget them and don't think about them. I want to give you a challenge this week. Ready? Practice seeing people. Ask God to let you see what he sees, the way he sees them. Practice seeing people. The second one, value through attention. Once again, Jesus does this. He gives almost undivided attention immediately to the centurion. Somebody that would have been not easy to ignore, but easy to not care about at all. He gives him immediate attention. Matter of fact, you look across all the people. This is what made Jesus so unique. Immediate attention. Remove the labels. If I could challenge you this week, remove the labels and give attention to people with different ideas. Does it matter if a person's conservative or liberal? Do we have to give them everything that every conservative person has ever said and have to challenge them with that? That's what's wrong with our world. They give you a label and then they attach every negative thing that's ever been done by that group to you as if you did it. Vice versa, liberal, and then they attach everything to it and go, oh, I'm not going to listen to you. I'm not going to give you any attention. I'm just going to yell at you with my keyboard. The next one is value by giving time. It wasn't that he was attentive only. He also gave them his time. I want you to notice in the 8th chapter of Matthew that Jesus not once said, oh, I would like to, but I'm too busy to do that. Now, maybe we will have to say, I'm too busy because we are in a different spot, but it shouldn't be constant. That our lives are focused on, sorry, I can't, I'm too busy. Sorry, I'd like to help you, I'm too busy. I'd really like to reach out and be there for you, but I'm too busy. If you're too busy all the time, you need to reschedule your life. Because this is one of the ways that Jesus gave value to people, because he didn't constantly say, I'm too busy. I want to give you another challenge for this week. Take time this week for a family, friend, or even a contact that you've maybe kind of lost a little bit of time with, that you've forgotten, or maybe you just hadn't heard from them in a while. I want you just to take time for them. Give them the gift of time. The last thing that we see Jesus doing is not just that he just gives them his time, he also values them by meeting their needs. Here's the core of what Jesus does constantly. What can I do to help you? What can I do to help you? I want you to think about every one of these that Jesus meets, even when Peter doesn't ask. Oh, your mother-in-law's sick. I'm going to help you. I'm going to help you. This is how Jesus valued people. I want to challenge you today to put some of these challenges in practice this week. And you may be thinking, I don't know if I can do this. It feels very exhausting. Well, you're probably right. Because we run out of our own energy. The worship team is going to lead us in one last song today, and it really is about the reckless love of God. And the reason I want to sing this is showing once again the love that Jesus comes out for us. How did he exhibit love to us? And then we want to end by just praying that we would experience that abundant love for others. Let's worship